Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I think it's apt to say this is our very first time ever trying this, although Mick, you and I have actually recorded podcast episodes of a different type together
Yep,
before,
that's right.
which I think is how we met, I think, right?
It is. It is exactly how we met.
Yeah.
Virtually, right? We've actually never
We've
met
never
in
met in
person.
person.
That's the modern friendship, right?
I
Love
think
it.
absolutely, yes. Although I've told you before, I am planning a trip out to Whitefish, Montana to see you.
Oh yeah, we'll have to do some podcasts from the top of the mountain out there.
Absolutely. Want to do some skiing out there. So, anyways, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome to the podcast. It's our first time giving a go with this one. So, we don't, as of the recording of this, we don't have a name. We don't have anything more than what I think the hopes are of what we both are hoping to get from the podcast. But I think, we're both, I think it's apt to say that we're both excited about this right now. I mean, I know I'm excited.
Yep, I'm excited too. We're excited together.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this first episode, I think we were starting to talk about how we got interested in this because, Mick, you and I really have, this has been an emphasis in the conversation that we had even right before this podcast that we are not, we're not academics. We don't study philosophy. Our philosophy is very much an applied philosophy, I think was one of the, uh, one of the words that we used together. It's a kind of, everyday philosophy that we're applying in our everyday because you and I both in our roles in our work and in our lives we do have high stress or high tempo environments and I think we both use this a lot in our day to day, right? So we were talking about a little bit of an intro with ourselves, and so I'll open with asking you a couple questions and we'll see where it goes, which is you know let's do a quick introduction of yourself and then let's do how did you get introduced to the philosophy and maybe something like what's your first sort of day-to-day practice of your philosophy most days.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I'm super excited, like you are, about starting this podcast, and I echo your statement on the fact that I'm not a philosophy professor. I'm not a professional at this. I'm an amateur, and I think that's going to be what we focus on because a lot of Stoicism, of course, it's carried on by amateurs because it is a philosophy for life, both in its length and in its everyday. To your question, how did I get involved? I got involved actually early on as a child. My father was he was an actual Jesuit priest, right? So if you're not familiar with that order, it's like the education, the philosophy, the human rights order that really focuses on that around the world. He obviously left the priesthood, or I wouldn't be talking to you today. So happy for that. But he certainly instilled in me that concept, the Jesuit philosophy, and he taught me ethics through philosophy, like essentially Stoicism. So I was a Stoic before it was cool, so to speak, and nobody knew what I was talking about. Literally, I grew up all over the country, but a lot of it was in the South. My dad was a scientist and professor. Everybody down there was a Baptist, and I was the Stoic. It's kind of like used to joke. But that's how it started, and then it went throughout my whole life. I served in the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine and as an officer. Stoicism, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, a lot, is very infused throughout the military, U.S. military, and other militaries. So I saw it many times. A lot of our required reading um, were books based on Stoicism. Obviously, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations um, was required reading, still is required reading. And then I was recruited into the Central Intelligence Agency in a group called the Special Activities Center. So it's the special operations, if you will, of the CIA. And I did that for an entire career. many, many around me were interested in Stoicism. It was talked about fairly often, probably more than you would think for a group that's so action oriented to talk about philosophy. Um, it carry over from the military is essentially everybody in that unit was recruited out of the U.S. military. And then after I retired from the CIA, I was the deputy assistant secretary of defense for the Middle East under Secretary Mattis. And as I know you know, but a lot of the listeners who are familiar with him probably do know, he is a well-known Stoic who used to actually carry a copy of Meditations with him in combat. So it's always been around. And then when I finally retired, so to speak, entirely, although I'm not, we run a veterans group of that focuses on humanitarian operations around the world. So oftentimes I'll be talking to you from different places. Um, but when I actually had more time, then I started getting into Stoicism publicly, both to talk about its application to the military, Plato's Academy Center, the Aurelius Foundation, and now I'm super excited to be talking with you and starting this podcast that hopefully people will find very helpful and useful to their everyday lives. And we can make a difference that way. So that's my story of how I end up here at the podcast. What about you, Adam? Can you give us your origin story of Stoicism?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an interesting juxtaposition between the two of us because I came at it from the fact that as a young person, I was always around the Stoics because of an interest that I had in the classical world and philosophy sort of in general. Um, there was classics always in my home when I was a kid, and so I would always sort of know, I knew who Plato and Aristotle was, and I knew who Socrates was, and all of that, and it was just something that was kind of going through there, and then of course, within my age group, one of the defining moments of in terms of cinema, for example, is Gladiator comes out, and you hear about this guy called Marcus Aurelius, but my current usage of it, I really picked up about 12 years ago. I went through some challenging times in my personal life and my professional life, and was looking for a way to find a mindset or a philosophy that could best replicate in me what I wanted to be, how I wanted to be, who I knew I was on the inside, and who I knew I wanted to be. And that's kind of how it got started. I also have one quick thank you to say to someone, which is my friend. His name is David, but I know him as Star Lord because he knows me as Rocket. Sort of a different story, but Star Lord had been a follower for a long time, and he introduced me to it again. And because I knew of the meditations, I knew of Epictetus. I just had never really applied it or anything. And so all of a sudden he said, "Well, I'm going to something called Stoicon, and let's go." And I went, "Oh, okay." So we went, and it was great. Actually, he and I and a third friend named Cecily went, and it was one of those really interesting weekends where you went, "Oh, okay. I feel like this is my people. This is my jam, as it were." And that's kind of how it got started in the modern sense. But I kind of always been around it. So interestingly, it's more of a newer thing for me. Um, and then yeah, but the thing is though, as well is, in the last 10 years, my career has taken me into very high tech medical devices in the world of neurosurgical robotics. And then in the last 5 years, I just recently celebrated my 5 year anniversary of being in this world that I'm in now, which is the space program. I work with the space program here in Canada, and I work in the world of human rated space flight safety. So we're making space stuff for people to use up there, and it's a very, I wouldn't say it's a high paced environment because we don't do anything live, and my stuff hasn't launched yet, but we do something that is, I would say, high tension, high intensity, because we are making decisions that directly relate to the health, safety, and well being of crew members on things like the ISS, or on things like the new gateway station for the moon. And so, yeah, so I use that now in that world. And what's interesting, and this was a parallel I was hoping to get a chance to bring up, is that the space program has long been populated with members of the armed forces, and they come in from all walks of the armed forces. It's not just the Air Force. John Glenn was a Marine, I think, Mick, unless I'm
Yes,
incorrect in remembering
you
that.
are correct.
Yeah, so John Glenn was a Marine, Alan Shepard was a naval aviator, right? And that has existed right through until now. And in fact, right now I'm reading the Challenger book by uh, Higginbotham, and
Hmm.
in it they talk about Dick Scobie. Well, Scobie was a naval aviator, and
Hmm.
it's sort of like, oh, okay, so there's, I think, within the space program world that I live in, there will always be this resounding kind of echo from this armed forces life. And even in the Canadian space program it's the same. Two of my very good friends in the space program that I work with at my office, I don't work for the Canadian Space Agency, I work for a private contractor. But in my work, I work with two ex Canadian Armed Forces personnel, and it's interesting. They sort of talk about. There's a little bit of they know what I'm talking about when I say that. So that's kind of how I
Sure.
got started, and that's what I do now.
Awesome.
So
Well, I got to tell you, I'm completely fascinated with space exploration. So I know I'll try not to digress too much because I could ask you 100 questions on that.
Well, I think we're here
Well,
to
maybe
ask questions.
we'll try to connect the two, just so we can bring that part of the conversation in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think the thing that I have found so interesting about your journey has been is that it started so young. I mean, so I guess if I could ask a question, it's that, you began your journey by just being exposed to it because of your father, as you were saying, but also but did it take a hold with you? Like, what did it really grab you when you were young, or did it take a while to take effect? Like, because I was exposed to that when I was younger, but it really didn't start taking effect until about 10, 12 years ago in my life.
I think it was a combination. I've always been super interested in history, so um, the foundations of Western civilization, happened in Athens at the same time. Obviously, Socrates and then Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, uh, were coming up with their, philosophical outlook. So I liked history, and then my dad used a lot of the allegories from uh, Plato's Republic, for example, to kind of
Yeah.
teach ethics and in some ways morality at the same time. I
Hmm.
mean, I also went to church and all that stuff, but this was something that I just found super fascinating, and even as a little kid, and then it just kept coming back up in my life. It wasn't even necessarily intentional,
Yeah.
but I did feel it helped a lot because and I think one of the things that draws a lot of people to Stoicism is that if you practice it, if you generally earnestly practice it, you will be a better person. It's almost impossible, in my opinion, not to be if you're trying. And what I mean by that is, not everybody's perfect, right? And not everybody
Yeah.
is the sage, so to speak. But and this is part of stoicism. If you're a 6 going to a 7, or you're a 3 going to a 4, you're still better off, and society's better off if you're trying to go in that direction, right? So
Yeah.
any progress is good. So I've always, some things I think I'm better at than others, when it comes to like the cardinal virtues, for example.
Yeah.
And one of the, I'm an Irish, and Michael Patrick Mulroy, right? So I'm an Irish American Marine. So temper has not always been my my strong suit,
Yeah.
um, and but the fact that I really want to adhere to the temperance part, it makes me pause more than I would if I wasn't really trying to be the better Stoic. You know what I mean?
I
So
do know what you
yeah,
mean. Like, I don't know if this resonated with you, but to paraphrase something from Meditations, right? There was sort of Marcus is telling him this one thing, and he sort of says, it's not the act of completing this; it's just the fact that you try, the fact that you do. You fail one day, you get up the next day, you try again. And I can't remember exactly the phrasing.
damn right. I mean,
Actually,
that's life, right?
I
I
know.
mean, It's like Rocky Balboa. It's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you stand back up,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, that's to me has always been very helpful throughout life. And there's always, I mean, obviously, I told you my background. I
Hmm.
spent most of my years in conflict zones, like in war, as 20 years. So I've seen the worst of human nature, the absolute worst, and I had to deal with it in a very personal way. So it's stuck with me throughout that. It was always like the light. There's a lot of darkness, but the light was to me my friends and my philosophy,
Right.
and it really did carry me through in worse times, right? So
Hmm.
I can't get into the size of my unit, but um, we lost. I mean, it was close to 20%. You know, died in action. So I mean, that's hard to deal with for anybody, anytime, anywhere. One death, but it was just constant, and I do attribute my my adherence and my philosophy, if you will, like some people attribute their religion. And I'm not equating the Stoicism to a religion, but it did help me throughout that. And I think it's helped many people that I've known that's gone through difficult times in a way
Yeah.
that they they really needed at that time.
Yeah. Going to StoiCon, which I can't remember if you've ever attended one in person, but the last two StoiCons I was at, which were in person, the interesting thing I find with so many people is they have a similar experience to me, where they go, "Oh, so that's stoicism," and they sort of go, "Well, that's how I'm trying to be. That's how I want to be,"
Yep.
right? And I think that
Yep.
resonates with people a lot, as they go, "Oh, I don't have to be a robot. I don't have to be X. I don't have to be Y." And
Right.
I think, like,
Right.
I'm interested to see if you've ever had that happen with, if you've ever introduced somebody and they sort of go, "Oh," because for me, like, the light bulb really switched on for me, where I was like, "But that's what I want to be. I want to be, well, as you were saying with the virtues, I want to be temperate. I want to
Mhm.
be courageous. I want to be wise. I'm trying to be." And so many people I find, they go, "Oh, well, that's what I'm trying to be too." And you're like, "Well, maybe there's a place for you here, right?"
Exactly. I think there's a place for everybody. And
Yes.
I'm speaking at the next OACon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be on global citizen, I think is the topic they asked me to speak on. So if people are interested, I would sign up.
Yeah.
Not just because I'm going to be yapping, but it is really helpful and it gets new people involved
Mhm.
every time they have it, and that's really good because it's growing. And people are like, oh, it's a fad. No, it's not a fad. It's
Yeah.
going on for thousands of years, right? It's going to ebb and flow, and
Sure.
that's okay. But and to your point, Adam, like when I talk about stoicism, I get a lot of times I get people going, "Oh, really? One, yes, I think I'm a stoic. That happens a lot. And two, I didn't know that was. I mean, whether you bring up, you know, the opening prayer for Alcoholics Anonymous, which is about as stoic as you can get. When you tell them
Pretty much.
that, I mean, from that, helping people get over, addiction to Stockdale. Why did Admiral Stockdale survive many years as a POW? And you explain the story of Invictus. Saw the
Yeah.
final phrase on the wall, and he knew then that he would survive. I mean, as dramatic as that. So his everyday life and as dramatic as, or George Washington having his troops watch Cato, um, the play before going into battle. Like
Yeah.
most people wouldn't have. I mean, it is infused throughout Western civilization, our history, and it's obviously spread around the world, and
Yeah.
which is a very much a Stoic
Yeah,
concept.
and speaking about infused, in some cases it's infused in a country or in a place, right? And I think that's an interesting thing that I've seen, and people are so surprised by that, right? But, like, to find out that a prominent Stoic like Seneca had his plays acted out by troops under George Washington, and I remember reading that and going, "Wow, that's so, like." I don't remember when it happened in the American War of Independence that this occurred, but you kind of go, like, it's been so prevalent in these different sort of crescendos over time where it sort of gets really big and then it shrinks again. And and you find these points where you go, wow, that person read the same thing I did, and you're like, wow. But I mean, this is
Exactly.
where I kind of feel like it's one of those things where I think it's good that it's a philosophy because you can chat about it. You and I can have this conversation. We can disagree with it even. We can disagree with the philosophy, but we can keep talking about it. And so many people, even in that circumstance, they kind of talk to me about it and they're like, "Oh, you can discuss it." I'm like, "Yeah, it's not a religion in the sense of it doesn't have a dogmatic doctrine to it, right?" And so
Exactly.
you can you can do these things. But yeah, what you were just saying about the revelation that people tend to have, that's a very common thread within my experience as well. Talking about it with my partner or with my friends who are not practitioners, they kind of go like, "Oh, I thought." Like actually, well, because I have friends who are big Star Trek nerds, and they'll say, "Oh, I thought you guys were Vulcans," and I'm like, "Oh no, I don't want to be a Vulcan. I don't think I could be if I tried."
So would
You know?
Spock be stoic? Do you think? I mean, I'm not a big.
No, because Spock as a Vulcan represses emotion. He does
Right.
not, right? There are definitely parts of his being that I think embody parts of it, like um, his pursuit of wisdom. And actually, Vulcans do their repression as a form of temperance, essentially. But
Right.
the thing is that and I would love to get your take on this one virtue, just because it's a very interesting first step into Stoicism. Is courage, to me, is not the absence of fear. It is not the absence of emotion in doing something, because it's not courageous to brush your teeth if you're not scared, like
Right.
but it is courageous to do something because of that happening and because of that. And as human beings, we experience emotions, right? So Spock is not a stoic because simply for that one big reason, because they just repress it and ignore emotion,
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know, when when you were an active member of the armed forces in a military zone, like at carrying a firearm. Maybe you still do that, but like what I mean is when you're in an active combat zone, and it can be scary to go around a corner, that you still feel that fear, and when you still do that action, that's where the courage comes in. Vulcans would just say, I feel nothing, I am walking around this corner, right? And that's a very different opinion. Sorry, I hope I represented that okay. It's just the circumstance of that's a very common misconception, is everyone thinks that we're robots, and I think you and I have had this conversation before. We are not robots. We are human beings that have feelings and have emotions, right?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's a good example to bring up because it's one of the misnomers about Stoics is that they are emotionless when it's not true. The point is to be able to control your emotions in a positive way and not let them rule you.
Yeah,
Right? So um, maybe Spock is a perfect example of what you and I are talking about. It's
yeah,
not about being emotionless. Right? You're human. You're going to have emotions. It's
yeah,
about understanding that you're going to have them and controlling them in a positive way. And to your point on courage, yes, I've seen. I don't carry a gun anymore in Warzone. We actually run around and deliver food and medicine. Right? I guess we're trying to make up for past lives, but it's still dangerous. And what I've
sure.
seen, and I've seen some of the bravest people in the world, um, they're all scared. In fact, if you're not scared, you're probably just stupid. Right?
Yeah,
If somebody's shooting at you, you're not scared. There's something you're missing. It's the ability to have somebody shooting at you and get up and go forward because it's your mission, or
yeah,
get up and go forward and save your brother on the battlefield. That's courage.
yeah,
And I've seen it a lot.
yeah. And so, but I'm interested as well because I do want us to have a conversation later about what our regular practice is like. But do you ever incorporate anything else within your I always call it practice because practice means you repeatedly do it, right? You got to keep working at it. Is there anything else in your practice? Maybe something that isn't specifically stoic? Like I do have parts of my practice that are not specifically stoic, but what about you?
So, I mean, I don't know that I would. I mean, when stuff that is stoic, like I do reflections, I do journal, I journal to a certain extent. I was always careful with that. That's my old job. You really just can't sit around and write too much stuff about yourself. But I always did, and it was an interesting side story. You can look at this. One of the guys in my unit who was killed in Iraq, one of the things that is most associated with, he used to journal, and his journal is now published. I mean, you can look. His name was Doug Zembeck. He was a Marine who. So I talked to him about it once, and it got me doing it again. Like I told myself I was too busy to do it, and then I saw him doing it, and I was like, oh well, I'm the I'm the guy that's been spreading stoicism all over the agency, so maybe I should actually practice what I preach. So I did, and I started, and I do that. I do that to a certain extent, but I also read and reread something that Ryan Holiday really pushes. For those who are familiar with the Daily Stoic, um, and I agree with him. It's not just it's got to be a continuous thing, and every
Yeah.
time you read, you know, whether it's meditations or the handbook or what have you, you're going to learn something else.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's almost like scripture in that you go back to it continuously. For those who practice religion, uh, uh, devotion. But it's almost like scripture in that sense that you go back to it and learn something else, or you focus on it, and it just makes me more engaged in stoicism. And if I didn't have it, to be honest, I would just be so engulfed in work. Um, so to me, that stoicism is not only a life philosophy; it's also just a hobby in that sense of the word. And
Yeah. Yeah, I would
there are
say for me it's probably a hobby as well. Well, we both have careers. We don't study this every day. Like again, we it's a hobby for us because we have to do other stuff. We have to, we have jobs.
yes, that's right. But you can always carry it with you wherever you go.
Absolutely.
And I do think routine is super helpful to a person, especially a person that's really busy.
Yeah. Yeah, as well. Yeah, me as well. I mean, I think my earliest entry into the world, Donald Robertson has this little he sometimes has this little opening to some of his stuff where he talks about a passage about like it's early morning, the candles are out, and Marcus Aurelius is awake and he's writing to himself and whatnot. And he's sort of talking about how Marcus writes to himself every morning, or we don't know when Marcus would actually write in his journal, but we do know that he was doing it so regularly that we ended up with like a huge book of his stuff, right? And I think the routine and regularity of that is I think that's something that's very common with a lot of Stoics is the prevalence of that routine, the prevalence of that recurring every day or as much as possible every day, task where you reflect, you meditate on something, right? And I think that's pretty common. I don't know if everybody does the same thing, and you and I've talked about we are going to talk one day where we specifically talk practice and we specifically talk about what that looks like. But yeah, I think you're right though. That recurring action, it's how you get it ingrained in your mind. It becomes like a muscle memory where something happens and you go, "Oh right, I need to think about this for a moment." And do I really need to feel angry about this or something like that, right? So sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no.
Exactly. And a lot of that in modern life can be frustrating. I think to many people, it's different. It's social media. It's people who would never think to say something as rude as they would on social media, doing it because they can and they're somewhat anonymous. Um, I think this is now more about, people say, it's a 1,000-year-old philosophy from dudes and togas, ancient Greece. It's just as applicable today as it was then, maybe even more so, I guess is my point. Uh, that people stay grounded in what matters. And what matters in life isn't um, your bank account or the type of car you drive or living in some fancy pants mansion. Not that any of those things are bad, um, but they don't make you good and they don't make you any better than anybody else. So what does make you a good person? Maybe not better than anybody else, but it is who you are and what you do. So I think people that believe that or want to believe that, or want to be a better person, this is something that could really help you get there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so, for those, since it is our first episode, we're introducing ourselves. If anybody's interested, if they want to join in, if they want to be part of it, I think, we are we're Mick and I are already on this journey. If you're thinking about starting the journey, I think it's worthwhile to at least take a second look at and make sure that you ask yourself whether or not you see something in this that reflects how you wish to be as a person. Because I think that's what Mick and I do. If that's a correct interpretation. So
It is. Indeed.
so I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up on this recording of this episode. But Mick, I appreciate you sharing all of that with me, and I hope you've gotten something out of this session of conversation just like I have.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this. We're starting our journey. This is the first step.
Absolutely. That's the way I think about it too. So with that, I think Mick and I will sign off, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.